I didn't notice it all at once. There wasn't some big argument. No slammed doors. No dramatic goodbye. Just small things. Changes so subtle you could almost miss them if you weren't paying attention. The phone didn't ring as often. When it did, the calls felt shorter. Lighter. Like everyone had somewhere else to be. Conversations got clipped. The kind where people look at their watches more than they look at you. Where they nod and smile, but their eyes are already halfway out the door. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Everyone's busy. Life doesn't slow down. And me? I'm older now. Maybe I'm just not part of things like I used to be. Maybe they've got their own worries and I shouldn't expect to be at the center anymore. But still, something in me knew that the space between us wasn't just time. It was something else. Something harder to name. And then came the birthday. My grandson, Ethan, turned 12. I didn't hear about it from him. I saw it unfold through photos on Facebook. Balloons, cake, cousins, smiles, but not one picture with me in it. Not a chair saved at the table. Not even a passing mention in the caption. Because I wasn't there. Not because I was sick. Not because I forgot. Not because I said I couldn't make it. But because no one expected me to be there. They didn't forget me. They just left me out. And that kind of silence, it lingers. It doesn't shout. It hums. Quiet and steady. Right there in your chest. Like an unanswered question that won't stop echoing. So I called my daughter that evening. Tried to keep my voice light. Said something like, looked like a fun party. Even I could hear the crack in my own voice. She hesitated, and then she sighed. That kind of sigh that already knows it's going to hurt. Dad, she said gently. We just wanted him to have a fun birthday. Without the complaining. Without the heavy energy. Sometimes it's just hard to be around you. She didn't say it to be cruel. But it landed like a knife anyway. Because deep down I knew it was honest. Too honest. And that's when it hit me. I hadn't just missed a party. Somewhere along the way, I had become the person people braced themselves around. Not because I yelled. Not because I argued. But because something in me had shifted quietly, slowly into something heavier. Once, I brought light into a room. Stories. Jokes. Questions that made people feel seen. But lately, maybe I'd started bringing a shadow instead. That realization didn't crash in like a wave. It seeped in, slow and steady, until I couldn't deny it anymore. If you've ever felt it, that ache when your own presence feels like too much. When the room doesn't quite make space for you the way it used to, then maybe this isn't just my story. Maybe it's yours too. Here on Elderly Wisdom Story, we don't tell stories to fill time. We tell them to fill truth. We speak about aging, about family, about the quiet spaces no one names. Until one day they become louder than any words. We don't just get left behind. Sometimes we fade. One missed moment, one short call, one silence too many. But this isn't the end. This isn't a sad story. Not really. Because what came next changed everything. And if you're still with me, it might change something in you too. It didn't break me all at once. No. It was slower than that. Softer. The kind of quiet that slips in unnoticed. Until one day, it's all you hear. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. That families go through phases. That silence doesn't always mean distance. But the truth crept in slowly. Not through one big moment, but through the steady absence of the small ones. The phone still rang sometimes, but it didn't feel like a conversation anymore. It felt like a checklist. Did you take your meds? Need anything from the store? Okay, love you. Click. 2 minutes. Maybe less. No warmth. No follow-ups. No. Tell me about your day. Because maybe they already assumed I had nothing new to say. Even dinner lost its meaning. My daughter started plating food before I even came to the table. Fewer dishes. Less seasoning. No more waiting for me to say grace. I used to sit across from her and tell stories she'd heard a dozen times but still smiled at anyway. Now she barely looked up. The kids ate fast and scattered just as quickly, like they couldn't wait to escape the gravity of my presence. So I stayed at the table a little longer, chewing slower, trying to hold onto moments that had already moved on. They didn't ask me much anymore, not out of meanness, but maybe because they'd stopped expecting me to have something worth sharing. And the hardest part? No one yelled. No one pushed me away. It was just a quiet fading, like someone slowly turning a light down until you're no longer sure it was ever on. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen, my plate half full, the hum of the fridge suddenly loud. I picked up my phone, not to call anyone, just to see. No texts, no missed calls, just that pale blue screen staring back at me, and something inside cracked. Not because someone left, but because everyone had already learned how to stay. Without me, I didn't decide to change because they asked me to. They didn't. No one begged me to stay. No one pulled me aside and said, please come back to who you were. They had already learned to live around me. And maybe that's what stung the most, how quietly they let me go. But after that night in the kitchen, after the stillness, after staring into that cold, glowing screen, a thought surfaced. Not about them, about me. Not the version hunched over cold leftovers, checking a phone that never rang, but the one who used to start family dinners with a prayer. The one whose stories filled the room with laughter. The one who remembered every grandchild's birthday before social media ever did. The man who used to walk into a room and people looked up. That man didn't vanish. I had let him go. Layer by layer, under fatigue, frustration, unspoken disappointments, I buried him until even I stopped looking for him and realizing that hurt more than being left out. Because in truth, I didn't just miss the world around me. I missed myself. So no, I didn't change to be invited again. I didn't soften to win anyone's approval. I changed because I missed the man I used to be, the one who made others feel safe, the one who made me feel alive. And I wondered, with everything in me, if it was too late, or if I still had time to find him again. Maybe, just maybe, if I had enough strength to fade, I still had enough light to shine. I didn't start with anything dramatic, no big speeches, no new me declarations, just a quiet choice that maybe I wasn't finished yet. It felt like brushing dust off a mirror I hadn't looked into for years. The reflection wasn't sharp, but it was still there. I found an old notebook in the junk drawer, spiral-bound, corners bent. Inside, some grocery lists, a recipe scribbled sideways, a phone number I no longer recognized. I flipped to a clean page, wrote the date, and underneath it 3 simple lines. The coffee was hot. The sunrise came through the blinds. My knees didn't ache this morning. That was it. It didn't feel powerful, but it felt possible. So I did it again the next morning. 3 things, every day. Some days, the words came easily. Other days, I had to scrape the bottom of my spirit just to write something like, "The heater works." I remembered my neighbor's name. No one corrected me today, but even that mattered. Then came something harder. I stopped trying to be heard and started trying to understand. I asked questions not to loop back into my stories, but to hear theirs. I asked my daughter what she was reading, asked my grandson what made his video game so exciting. When I didn't understand his answer, I didn't mock it, didn't sigh. I just said, "Tell me more," and I meant it. The hardest part was holding back. So many little moments where the old me tried to come roaring out. Like the day Ella spilled juice on the rug. The words almost flew out, "You need to be more careful." But I caught them, swallowed them, and instead I said, "Let's clean it up together." She looked up, surprised. Then she smiled. Not the tight, polite smile, the real one. And from there, things began to shift. My daughter didn't clear the plates so quickly. The kids stayed a few minutes longer after eating. Their questions felt less forced. And then, one day, Ethan came and sat next to me on the porch. No phone, no headphones, just him. We didn't say much. He picked at the wood railing. I just sat. I didn't fill the silence. I let it breathe. After a while, he said, "Grandpa, I like it when you're like this. You feel easier to be around." He smiled, and something inside me softened, not because I was forgiven, but because I was received. That moment wasn't loud. It wasn't big, but to me, it meant everything. Because in that quiet, I felt myself return. Not the version people tolerated, but the one they missed. And maybe, the one I'd missed most of all. It was a Thursday afternoon. Nothing special on the calendar. No big plans. Just a quiet, ordinary day. Ella came over after school, hair messy, cheeks pink from the cold. She kicked off her shoes, dropped her backpack by the stairs, and walked straight to me. She didn't say a word, didn't ask, didn't hesitate. She just wrapped her arms around my waist. Tight, warm, still. It wasn't one of those polite hugs. Not the quick ones where they lean in, tap your back, and move on. It was the kind that made time slow down. She stayed there, holding on. And when she finally looked up, she said, "You feel different now." I didn't have an answer, didn't need one. I just smiled, and she smiled back, then ran off like it was nothing. But to me, it was everything. That night, I passed the hallway mirror. Same face, same gray, same slope in my shoulders. But something was back. Not youth, not sharpness, something softer, warmth. I looked like someone people didn't avoid, someone they might want to sit beside again, someone remembered with affection, not just out of duty, but out of love. And I realized I didn't need to be younger, didn't need a sharper memory, smoother skin, or louder stories. I just needed to be someone whose presence felt lighter, kinder, safe. And that was already happening. I wasn't a brand new version of me. I was the same man, just returned from a long, silent distance. And this time, I brought light back with me. People think it's age that makes us old, but it's not. It's the heaviness. The weight we carry in our tone, in our silence, in how we hold onto the past like it's the only thing that made us whole. It's not the wrinkles. It's not the number. It's the energy. And the hardest truth? Most of the distance you feel, it doesn't start with them. It starts with us. The size, the interruptions, the way we turn every conversation into a comparison to how things used to be. We don't mean to push them away, but we do. And no one tells us. They just adjust. Visit less, talk shorter, smile tighter, until one day you see your own family's joy in a photo and realize you weren't in it. Not forgotten, just no longer expected. And that's a kind of heartbreak that doesn't shout. It just stays. Quiet, heavy, permanent, unless we choose to see it, to hear the silence not as punishment, but as invitation. An invitation to soften, to lighten, to show up not with answers, but with presence. Because you don't have to fix everything. You don't have to chase relevance. You don't need new clothes, perfect memory, or to sound younger. You just need to pause, to listen, to say thank you for the ordinary. That's where it begins. And when it begins, it spreads to your table, to your porch swing, to the people who thought they lost you, and slowly begin to lean in again. You don't need to be younger. You just need to be lighter. And maybe, just maybe, that's what they've been waiting for all along. So now I ask you, what was your moment? The one that hurt, the one that woke you up, the one you still carry quietly even when no one asks. Drop it in the comments. I'll read every word. Gently, patiently, like it matters because it does. And if this story touched something in you, share it with someone you miss, someone you've been meaning to reach out to but haven't. Maybe they're waiting for your silence to soften. Maybe they're waiting for your hug too. And if you'd like more stories like this, quiet, real, and meant to stay with you, subscribe to Elderly Wisdom Story. We're building a space for hearts like yours, a place where aging doesn't mean fading, it means deepening. And you're welcome here, always.